Kristen, you had to unmute.
All set. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you are in the world joining us. We're very excited to have you here for a very special roundtable discussion show this evening. My name is Kristen Banfield, and I'm one of the volunteer community outreach coordinators at Voice of Men 360. Before we get started, please let me share a brief introduction about Voice of Men 360, International Men's Day, and why this talk show, Open Up, is important and what it's all about. Voice of Men 360 is a nonprofit organization founded in 2020 and is based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Voice of Men 360 organization was born out of seeing a tremendous need and stepping up to help provide services and healing support to all men and boys in the life challenges that they may face. We are part of International Men's Day. International Men's Day has been serving for over 21 years and so far 90 countries around the world. And they've all joined together and are doing various activities regularly. International Men's Day follows 6 pillars, which focuses on the overall being of boys and men, and we certainly follow in the same footsteps. So for tonight's discussion, why we want to have this special discussion on systemic racism among Indigenous communities. Thinking first of all, how many of us really know or have a better understanding of the challenges, the struggles that our Indigenous communities go through over so many years and in day-to-day life, especially here in Canada, but also around the globe. We want to create awareness through having an open discussion on our platform here at Voice of Men 360. We also want to take time to recognize National Indigenous Peoples Day this year through this discussion. One of the other important reasons is that June happens to be Men's Health Month. So the well-being of boys and men in our society is very crucial, and we also want to create awareness in this month as well. So before we go on into our discussion, I'd like to share a few things with you. Here at Voice of Men 360, we want to take a moment to acknowledge the loss of lives in the residential schools across Canada and in fact across the world. We are here with you. We are standing shoulder to shoulder with all Indigenous communities here in Canada and throughout the world. And as the world now knows, the bodies of many children, in particular 215 to begin with, were scientifically uncovered on the grounds of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia, Canada. These children's deaths are undocumented. There were about 139 formal residential schools that operated over 100 years, and at least 4,100 of approximately 150,000 documented children died at residential schools across Canada. We at Voice of Men 360, again, we stand shoulder to shoulder with all Indigenous people. We are determined to do our part in the ongoing movement toward truth. We pray for the continued strength and healing of all Indigenous people and their communities. Voice of Men 360 is highly motivated and genuinely committed to building trust and offering support, not only during this very difficult time, but always. And I apologize. Reflecting on that statement just now, maybe I should have gone forward with the disclaimer first, but I'm going to do that now for our audience, but also for our panelists. So please do be advised that the content brought forward for any event facilitated by the Voice of Men 360 organization is always brought forward in good faith. However, may bring forth dialogue and opinions that are not representative of this organization. The facts and information are believed to be accurate at the time that they are offered. All facilitators, guest speakers, panel members, and audience participants are responsible for using their own good judgment in taking any actions that may relate to any discussions. The content brought forward may include discussion for some where they may be emotionally at risk. It is important to know that this organization is engaging in discussion forums only to offer and inspire awareness and connection, and is not providing therapeutic advice. If you need crisis intervention or therapy, you need to engage the services of a mental health professional in your area. If you have any questions about this disclaimer or the panel discussion, you may freely contact the Voice of Men 360 organization through the website, and the contact information is posted on all our social media, and I'll go over that at the end of our discussion. So with this now said, going forward, should you choose to voluntarily participate in this event this evening in any capacity, we absolutely welcome you. Should you decide that this event is not for you at this time, we also respect that choice and we welcome you to join us again later. So that brings us to our panel discussion. I want to welcome all of you for being here with us. Particularly, in my opinion, I think that you are all just tremendous leaders in this very important and intentional dialogue. I'd ask that you just take a minute to introduce yourselves for me, and I will just open up my screen here to be able to offer the introductions. So I'm wondering, Kristi White, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself. She comes to us from London, Ontario, and we'll open up her mic. There she is. Go ahead, Kristi.
Hi, my name is Kristi White. I'm a children's author from Oneida Nation of the Thames. I've also done many other works with numerous other organizations. And I'm sure there'll be more to learn as we go tonight.
Absolutely. We're really excited to have you, Kristi. And if Mama Lynn, could you let us know who you are and a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Lynn Chittick, Quasquimque, Delaware Nation, Lenape Tribal Council member, and I am in California at this juncture, but right now I'm in beautiful Idaho. So I'm the organizational founder of Torch, the Organization for Realizing Change in Humanity. Thank you.
Wow, wonderful. And it looks like you have beautiful blue skies behind you. Coming from southwestern Ontario today, where I'm at, it's been quite a rainy day. So beautiful to see that as well. And we also have Arthur. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and where you are today?
Yes, my name is Arthur Lockhart. I'm the founder emeritus for the Gatehoust. And I'm also, by way of the painting behind me, a close friend of a fellow by the name of Randy Charbonneau. His name was Waymagun, Swain Feather, and we were very close friends for a great many years. And the reason I'm even in the panel this evening is I really want to honor what he brought to our understanding about the horrific scenarios that Indigenous populations around the world have experienced and the very honorable processes that he was supporting and initiating to respond to those situations. So I'm very honored to be sitting here with everybody this afternoon, or this evening, or the morning for that matter.
Well, welcome and thank you. And thank you very much for sharing that insight as well. And we hope through this discussion that we will be doing just that, which is honoring people's experiences, honoring humanity in general, and hopefully we can provide some awareness and support for those that are listening.
Yeah.
We do have one other guest that we're hoping to share a few words at least from him this evening. So we'll let you know when he signs on. And his name is Dr. Gerard Abouyou Roberts. And we look forward to hearing from him a little bit later. So without further ado, are you all ready to kind of dive into this discussion?
Yep.
Okay, so we certainly do try to plan a little bit ahead and offer some questions to think of, but you know what, within the hour and such a very important topic, you know what, when you're speaking from your heart and from your experience, that's all we can ask. So we'll try to have a very rich hour, and please let me know if anyone needs to take a break or pass on a certain section of what we're discussing or what have you, because I want to make sure I'm being respectful of that as well. So looking at an issue such as systematic racism, oppression, things that have been going on for hundreds of years in many countries, but especially in Canada, I think that we are in a time, a very powerful time, where the things that are happening in society and the things that are coming about are really starting to have people, thankfully, question themselves, do some reflection, and really take a look at, you know what? I think I do have some biases here. I think I do have some things I need to take a look at. In your experience or from your thought, what do you guys think are what are some of the best ways you can think of that can help identify biases that we all have?
Is it open-ended, Kristi?
Yes, I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
lost everybody. I can only see myself. So once we switch over to the panel, certainly, Lynn, if you're ready to chime in, please do so.
I
There
looked
you
at
are.
the question for just a little bit, and I think if anything I see is systemic trauma. And I think if we look at bias, we tend to look at systemic trauma as acting out from a culture or a society or a people. And I think if we looked at anything, we have to look at systemic trauma as one of the larger biases of our time.
Absolutely. And I think that a piece of that really is helping people understand their individual biases to then start to really relate that to how that impacts systems. Any thoughts, Kristi, from your end on that?
The thing is, it's so complex, right? When you're talking about these kind of things, when we start getting into, we get into so many different aspects of bias, all those kinds of things. If we start, from one end to the other, when we start at men's issues, when we talk about child welfare, when we talk about on and on and on and on and on. I think a lot of people are learning about bias from all angles. And I don't think just our biases and just Indigenous people, but people all around. And how that bias is actually leaked into those major systems. When we look at child welfare system, I was looking at the numbers again today. We're only 7.7 of the population, yet 59.8% of Indigenous children are in care. Then if we look at like the jail system, and that I've been studying a lot. I am a mother of an incarcerated Indigenous male. And it's interesting because even in those statistics, like our men who are incarcerated definitely outnumber other men in there when you're talking about different demographic, society, all those things. And I do absolutely agree with Lynn that it comes from the trauma that's been, down and down and down. The original place to start when it comes to Indigenous trauma has to start with the Indian Act. The whole Indian Act was completely set up to assimilate, abolish. It was an attack on Indigenous men and their families to pretty much wipe out their existence. So, it's a hard statement because, everywhere you go, the bias that's there is just kind of gets incredible to start narrowing down to one or two things.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest words there is complexity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And helping people unpack what that actually means and how you get from a giant system down to ourselves and what we can do. Arthur, any thoughts from you in terms of general biases and how people may or may not realize that they actually do operate within them?
I think people walk around with sort of a default position, a default stance of, yes, it only makes sense that those folks are in jail because they're poor and they're drug addicted and they don't know how to be in society, and without ever once thinking the social structures created that system for people to be in those experiences. And there's a young girl, she was killed in a car accident. She was only about 10 or 11 years old. Her name's Sarah, from a reserve in Northern Ontario. number of years ago. And she was in a school that was so dilapidated that it was just a really terrible setting. Rats running across the desks, this kind of thing. And I'm not trying to be overly dramatic here. Anyway, she rallied people around her and went to Ottawa to protest what was happening at these schools. And this is many years ago now, that the children in these different settings were in horrible conditions to be in a school setting. And she died. She died in a car accident in her quest as she was driving to raise awareness on this issue. And to me, that was a real unbelievable, powerful human being, this 11-year-old, 10-year-old girl. And here we are today, 2021, and I think this was like 15 years ago that this happened. And where are we now? You can go to places in Canada populated with Indigenous populations that cannot go and turn on a tap and get clean water. We don't, as a general rule, how many people know that in our country? How many people have been taught about that in our country under some kind of formal education? Very, very, very limited. Very limited. So we've created an entire structure in our country that creates and promotes intergenerational trauma. It promotes the ongoing trauma, and it will continue until we finally really stop and say, no more. That's when this is going to change.
Thank you very much. Very, very important insights there, and things that we can all learn from. And actually, one of the things that I continue to learn is, as an individual, and certainly as a white woman, coming from a very privileged background, and Kristi and I have had discussions about this in the past, where realizing that privilege, and white privilege specifically, doesn't mean that we're all rich, right? We're not all monetarily rich. It means, generally speaking, that because I'm white, I don't have the struggles, nor do I have to think in the way that an Indigenous person does, or a person of color, or any other marginalized population for that matter. But also realizing that one of the things in that is I have a choice, and I can make a choice as to whether or not I continue to live in my biases or I don't. It really doesn't impact me in terms of what can be afforded to me, where that's simply not the case. Simply not the case for Indigenous people at all.
Well, and to bring up like the whole thing about talking about clean water, I wanted to go back to what Arthur was talking about, and actually very familiar with that young lady's story and her journey and those kinds of things. And just to make clear, a lot of people don't understand, like I am from Oneida, which is just outside of London, Ontario, which is a city center. My reserve does not have clean drinking water. We have not. That's the thing. You go to other reserves, like Arthur said, it's crazy over here. We've been to numerous communities that we visit. The babies have rashes because the water is contaminated. And yeah, it's like, even myself, it's crazy when you look at privilege and bias. And, I try and explain to people all the time, like, we get this whole sense of privilege of being a bad thing. And, nobody wants to own that. But on the same self, I'll be the first one to sit here and say, right now in this world, I have privilege, because the reserve I grew up in did not have a Tim Hortons 5 minutes away, did not have clean drinking water. I mean, I remember going to the well and having to drag that bucket at 5 and 6 years old, and now I can just go to the tap. So even that myself, like, I understand how even my own privilege has kind of, it's different than when I was a kid. And it's also different if we had housing and I actually lived at home.
I want to, if I may jump in too, just on what was just being said.
Yes, please.
about the idea of privilege. Somebody once asked me about how do you define freedom? And I said, it's movement. I can move anywhere. I'm a white Anglo-Saxon male. I get to travel around the world, take pictures of faraway lands. I have movement. I can move anywhere I want. And as in the last 48 hours, there's a member of parliament who has left her position. She is Inuit, and her movement, she was a member of parliament in Canada, walking in a building, and was accosted, in my mind, by a security official saying, "What are you doing here at this moment?" That I'm paraphrasing the exact scenario. But the point was that she was stopped and asked, what was she doing there? There's a member of parliament, Inuit, who her movement is stopped. That is absolutely built-in bias. It's racist. And that is alive and well right now in our country. And until we, all of us, get together and say that that just is not going to happen anymore, it will continue on. Like, this has been going on for, as you said at the outset, hundreds of years. And the movement, we've moved people off their land. We keep moving them further and further away from resources. What we are doing is we're pushing people away from movement, the ability to move into education, to the ability to move into whatever ideas and dreams a young person has. We keep isolating people. And somewhere along the way, we've got to stand up and all of us say at the same time, that's no more, we're not doing that anymore. And so I just wanted to say that in relationship to what the question was. Thank you.
I'm really glad you did, because it's an excellent way, I think, and I haven't heard it been defined in that way before. And I think that for as simplified as it is, mm-hmm. in a way, it's also can really resonate with everyone. Mm-hmm. Our freedom to move, whether it be down the street, in a shopping center, across the world, we have that freedom where Indigenous people do not. And
give you an example.
Go ahead,
Kristen. That just actually, Arthur, triggers something that I was talking about the other day with my own mother. My mom, everywhere, for the longest time, everywhere she drove, she'd get pulled over continually to do a sobriety test. And the crazy thing is I'd watch this continually as she'd come into town to London because she lived out on Oneida. And it would just make me shake my head because they'd automatically assume she was drinking Plur. And then I laughed because the police officer who would say to her, "Oh, have you been drinking? Can I see your ID?" The look on that person's face when she would hand over her Canadian military ID.
Wow.
Because my mother was actually just retired, captain in the Canadian Forces. And I've seen this happen numerous times where they've just assumed she's just an Indigenous female, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, which really, really, if you think about it, like, denounces what they do, right? When they do great things in their life and you're stopped like that, and just made to feel a certain way, like nobody else is being so up for a sobriety test on your way to work for the most part, and happening, 5-6 times a week.
Well,
I think that
I think if we look at assumptions, this is where, if we step back into ancestry and ancestor trauma and ancestor relations, to all of our relations, I just want to welcome our brother that just came on. Thank you. Welcome. I just want to put some of my puzzle together a little bit because it brings another wave of understanding. Some people that look white may not be so much white. It was my great-grandmother. When my father passed in 99, I had already been part of the Delaware Nation. I'd already been very engaged with the Delaware Nation and other tribal members. And I found out, I buried my pipe thinking I wasn't Native American, and I actually found out a year later after I buried my pipe that I actually was Native American. So I just want to put that out there, that the hidden assumptions in each of us about color of our skin or color of our nation or where we live or how we live and how we relate to this earth is a preciousness that I want to bring, because it's a hidden message. And my kids, their great grandmother on the other side, my ex-husband's side, is full blood as well. And so both these generations deny their ancestry roots. And I just want to put the denial part of the internal struggle of the assumption. It's our internal struggle, you know, for me to show up and teach from an Indigenous way when I'm a white American woman. And yes, privilege, I totally understand. And I understand racist. I've been on tribal lands many, many, many times teaching and helping and supporting. And I think when I look at my mother's pain in alcoholism, my father's pain in alcoholism, my father came from Canada, I wonder, because both sides of the family was Smith, and a lot of people changed their names. And I just know that we are in this on a deep, deep, deep assumption that each of us, you know, this one's Native and this one's not, by the color of our skin. And I want to bring that bias right to the forefront of our discussion, because I think we get biased just about that conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you bringing that forward, because there is a lot to learn about that piece of things and how intrinsic it is to the oppression and racism that Indigenous people experience every day. I want to take a moment as well and thank you, Lynn, for welcoming Gerard. Gerard, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We had, just to recap for you, please, and our audience as well, we've really been having a fulsome discussion so far. Kristi and Arthur and Lynn have shared some insights in and around systematic trauma and the assumptions people make, and, you know, the complexity of all of these kinds of issues, especially for Indigenous people and communities, and, you know, the white privilege that speaks to and speaks loudly and makes those assumptions, and how our biases are really feeding a lot of not only misunderstanding, but racism and missed opportunities for Indigenous people that many others take for granted. So just wanted to catch you up a little bit on the discussion at this point, and if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself a little bit, and we'll keep going in our conversation.
Okay, Gerard, Robert's traditional name, Abouyou. I'm from the Kristen Nation, and my family, wampum carriers of the Grand River Six Nation, where I just came from. so I apologize for being a little bit late. When things happen, and you just need to be there. So I'm glad I was there, and I'm glad I could be here now.
Well, we're thrilled to have you, of course, and thank you. And I'd like to move the discussion into, you know, a little bit around the power of our language. And I don't necessarily mean our native languages or our first languages, but I'm talking about the English language and the power of words.
I'll go.
Okay, Kristi's ready for that hot button topic, so I'm thrilled for that. So go ahead.
Actually, I was just about to get into that off of our last
Awesome.
little discussion, because one thing I find with the bias and stuff is that these boxes that were put in, for example, for myself, it seems like they have this system set up for competitiveness, and it's almost become the lateral violence that's involved in it, and again, intergenerational trauma and everything, and the fact of, including myself as a children's author, I will never just be Kristi White, the children's author. It'll always be Kristi White, the Indigenous children's author. And when you start putting those, I guess, boxes or symbols, it's almost like, well, there's only so many spaces for you guys. So therefore it makes everybody compete for, instead of, you know, having the whole world like everybody else of being a children's author, you're only get this part because there's only so many spaces for Indigenous authors or Indigenous this or Indigenous that. And I mean, I understand we've asked and pushed for to be culturally sensitive and, you know, make sure that you are getting right information for Indigenous people and stuff like that. But I don't think we wanted it so narrowed down that there was only, you know, very little boxes that everybody had to compete for Indigenous people. And I feel that kind of feeds into the trauma and the lateral violence, again, the inner fighting amongst different communities, different people.
I think that that's a really good example, and one that showcases something that people who are not Indigenous may not even be aware would be a concern of any kind. You know, and even things, for example, like having to change your Indigenous name to meet the needs of a white culture in order to either pronounce it properly or to fit into a government form, those kinds of things. And when I talk about language, things like even identifying people as a minority or disabled. Any thoughts around that, Arthur or Gerard, that you could bring forward for everyone? Oh, Gerard, we lost you. There you are.
Okay. I'll let Arthur go first.
Okay.
Yeah.
Windows to the soul, but I think language is a window to the soul also. And that in Canada, we have phrases that, again, keep pushing people to the side. We might say Italian Canadian, German Canadian. When was the last time that somebody was walking down the street of Toronto and said Ojibwe Canadian, Cree Canadian? That we're a very strange culture in terms of not acknowledging that we are displacing entire populations of people with our words. We keep making and pushing people. The phrase is, I was for many years a probation and parole officer in the province of Ontario, and I would hear the phrase, oh, they fell through the cracks, and they would be referring to somebody who was Indigenous in some of the programs I was involved in. And I never thought that, actually. I thought they were pushed through the cracks. They were pushed through the cracks with our language. And we have to figure, again, to stop and take stock of what it is that we say, all of us, that actually creates it so somebody becomes invisible right in front of our very eyes. That's the kind of thing I think about when you ask about our languages, our way we speak. What does that imply? What are the biases built into that? So that's just what I would offer there.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And something I guess I should have mentioned at the beginning is I am a professional in the child welfare system.
Right.
So certainly when you discuss about displacement, that is definitely something that resonates for anyone, especially Indigenous people that come across the child welfare system. Yeah. And I would further that to also add being very devalued and not being looked at as human beings that are worth doing business with.
Yeah.
And our language plays a very big role in that, and moving away from an approach that is you must, you will, you should, and oh, by the way, if you don't, here are the consequences, which will be life altering for you or your children.
Yes.
Or both.
Yeah.
And, you know, we're a long way from, you know, making a significant impact of change in that regard, but we thankfully are on that path. Gerard, what are some thoughts that may be coming to mind for you as we're discussing this?
We kind of lost him, man. Just hold on.
Did we? Okay. Well, and while we wait for him to reconnect, Lynn, is there anything resonating with you to share?
He's here. Hold on.
Oh, he's back. There he is. There he is.
Yeah, I don't know what happened there.
That's okay. You're back.
Okay.
We're back and happy.
All right, here we go. I remember in one of the readings of the Great Law, and we were having a discussion, and what I took away from it, and it's true because when you hear stuff like even today, when we listen to what everyone is saying, it's our job when we step away to reflect, And one of the things was said is that in our language, it's very.
Sorry, everybody. I think we may have lost connection again. There we go. There he is. Sorry that keeps happening.
Yeah.
Darn technology. It's a love-hate relationship we have with technology, isn't it? So you were mentioning our little bit of crackling, yep.
So where did I leave off there? Where did you hear last?
You were about to say something about the Great Law and
Yes.
and language, the power of language.
All right. So let's bring. Who wants to ask? Lynn. Okay, Lynn, go ahead.
Yeah, maybe Lynn could share some thoughts until. There we go. There she is. Oh, and you're indoors now. Let's see your
I had to
face.
come in. The outdoor cord didn't work, so here I am. So language, I just want to put, I think the language, as soon as Gerard said the Great Law and the understanding of our ancestry and the understanding of sound, for me, everything has sound. And when we listen with our ears, we actually listen better with our eyes and hear with our ears, as one of the elders shared to me. And when you start looking at language, there's sound, but then there's vibrational sound. And understanding of sound is a very key component to the witness of how tribal members and the discord between sound of a tribal member versus tribal relationship to second generations or third generations, Indigenous. And I remember there was a beautiful Cherokee elder, and he really wanted to pass down some of the Cherokee witness to me as I was training and developing in my 20s, 30s. And he was so excited for me to learn the Cherokee language because he said he had nobody to pass it down to. His children had been from another nation, he said, even though they were blood relations. So I just want to bring that to the forefront of what sound is, because every nation has its own sound, but it comes from the earth and the stars and from the richness of our cultural orientation. And I think we tend to think language, I would say language, formats into political regime of debate. And I've struggled with it for a very long time. And, in the silence, we hear the best language. And I think that's what I just wanted to share. And hopefully Gerard's back. But when I think about the Great Law, I think about that at least the circle I've come in and been with, that the sound is the preciousness of how much people have listened. And language has to be from that listening space.
I think that is very beautiful and something we can learn from. And it just brought to my mind, for those of us that do not have those teachings or who are not ready to listen to those teachings or figure out how they fit into Indigenous life, there's a difference between sitting in silence with someone and silencing them, in which you could do both with language or without. And it has filtered into our interpersonal relationships, to our education, to all of our systems, from child welfare to the law, to even, organizations such as healthcare that are meant to help people, but are not doing that based on whether or not we're truly listening, honoring, checking in on our own biases, those kinds of things. And I think all of you have really beautifully spoken to that so far in our discussion. Sivam, can you tell me if Dr. Gerard is back?
Yeah, Gerard is back.
Okay. Welcome back.
Yeah, it keeps cutting off and
Oh, shoot. Here we go. Well, Kristi and Arthur, are there things that have been going through your mind as Lynn spoke of the language and the power even of how we listen or don't listen?
Arthur has to unmute.
Sorry?
There you go.
And when we were doing some of the first training in restorative and transformative justice circles, one of the tenets that we operate within is the statement that there's a big difference between listening and waiting to speak. And I think in our structures here, there's an awful lot of waiting to speak. And it's really through listening, in the way that everybody's been talking about this evening, is the way to go. When we listen rather than wait to speak, that's when you really get a chance to do, hopefully, self-reflection and who am I, where am I, how did I get here? And again, however, in our culture overall in this country, there seems to be an emphasis on waiting to speak. And as a result, history keeps repeating itself, but at a more costly rate as we go forward. And we have to, again, figure out how to just slow it all down and start really listening, and then honestly, authentically acting, responding to what we hear. Because we just keep pushing people away, like I said earlier. So that's what came up for me about listening. The difference between listening and waiting to speak.
To just go off of what Arthur was just talking about, actually, that made me think is the listening, especially for Indigenous people. One thing I wanted to bring up is the fact that Indigenous people actually, because of our culture and our teachings and stuff, we have a tendency to just get into survival mode, deal with every day, those kinds of things. So we found through the generations, the big thing is in fixing this, and especially for non-Indigenous people to really understand, is to sit and listen to the stories, because some of it has become so normalized.
Yes.
I mean, growing up, I didn't realize that, the amount of people, unfortunately, that I've known within my family died of murder or suicide or drunk driving or all these different things. I just or not growing up with water. Like I had a conversation about that. My cousin during COVID coming into town, and she almost cried being able to, put her hands under running water. And, we kind of tease her and we just get over it because it seems like just our norm, right?
Yeah.
So I think one thing, as you were saying, Arthur, just listening to the stories, because you're really going to see what Indigenous people have really come to live with in the way of normal.
Yeah. Well said.
Absolutely. And something that comes to mind from what you're both sharing is around the importance of, as you said, Arthur, slowing down. And that's hard to do on a good day for a lot of people. And even those who are experiencing, the realization that, hey, wait a minute, this isn't the norm, or it shouldn't be my norm, right? I need to slow down, think about it. What do I need next? And where can I get it?
Yeah.
And because of so much that has happened, so many Indigenous people are not able to find it because they've been so disconnected or so pushed down, as you say, and moved away from. It's not readily available. And if they happen to find it, then they're supposed to be grateful. And it's tough to see and to sit back and watch. And even a recent tweet that came out, and I try to minimize my my news watching lately. But the minister, whomever is responsible for the drinking water and the projects in Indigenous communities, and he had me until in his tweet where he was saying, hey, here's a nation that now has clean, sustainable drinking water. Great. Let's keep moving. Let's keep getting the other communities that same basic need that every other Canadian has. But he ended the tweet celebrating that was, and I don't quote me on the number. I want to say, I think it was about 108 now boil water advisories that had now been canceled since 2015. And to me, that's a perfect metaphor for our governmental system, for example, who needs to learn about privilege and equity. And I understand they say equity is a journey, and I get that. However, where do you guys see history playing a part in decision making and it meaning something?
There's a wonderful, one of the most powerful books I've ever read called Stolen Continents by Ronald Wright out of British Columbia. And he's the fellow, I borrowed his quote about, if we don't pay attention to history, it keeps repeating and at a greater cost. And that, to my way of thinking, our culture here, the hegemonic culture of Canadian politics, is such that their decision making is based on money. So they keep talking about the cost of things to the point where they're still appealing, as I understand it, the money that could go to the children and the people who've suffered through the residential school system. They're still appealing the money that's going to be allotted to that. And so I think somewhere along the way, what you've just said, somewhere along the way, we have to just say, stop talking in those ways and start responding to the issues. Make it a mandatory, the number one issue, clean drinking water. There. Forget about the cost. It's not a cost. It's not a political thing. It's a human rights scenario. Make it happen.
That's great. That's great, Arthur. I think you're sharing. I didn't mean to. I thought you were maybe done there. You took a pause there for a minute.
Yeah, no.
I want to share. I ended up speaking. You're bringing up a great topic of that conversation in our now, but I got to speak to an Iroquois elder that walked in the women's rights movement with Katie Stanton and all. And I'm sorry I don't know her name, but there were many Indigenous women that walked together with white of all color for the women's rights movement. And I think if we find common ground in topics, I've tried to do that through our organization Torch. Peace, health, environment, and tech are all the issues we face. And they're very wide topics, but I try to do that so that we're not looking at it. But I'm trying to connect kids to kids from different cultures so that hopefully in 20 years there's a relational aspect to
Wonderful.
looking at it from a non, idea of how we separate people. And I want to go back to some of my theological roots that I've worked with, and it's about the other. The other is a huge conversation, and there's been so many great topics of theologians that have written about the other, and I'll try to come up with a book before, but this idea of the other, when you start looking at Native traditional values and values of our culture, that topic becomes so large and great when you open the dialogue and invite people in. And I think the invitation is hard because the receptivity to receive when you're in a feeling of loss or depth of pain or depth of ancestry trouble. It's hard to receive people into your life. And I think the more of the stories being told, as we talked about early on, I think maybe Kristi brought that up, about the storytelling and the relational parts. The relationships have to be opened, but it has to be on a common ground conversation. And it can't be about me against them, or me, I'm the other and you're not. Because if we keep that going, it's going to continue to be systemic, and it's going to continue to bring up the trauma. And I talk about it a lot because I want us to come to common ground together. And I worked a lot with Islam in the last few years because it was such a hot topic after 9/11, and and what those cultures, they have huge cultural issues the same way. And it's just a beautiful gift to be able to see the Indigenous people of those nations as well. And if you look at all nations, we've all been the apartheid of another nation, and the apartheid of ideas that have continued to make us the other.
Yeah.
So I hope that made sense. But I think that's what I think a lot about when I think about common ground and where we can have a conversation.
Absolutely. And I think that, that's one of the critical pieces that we can miss sometimes, is that regardless of who we are, where we come from, common ground could be found if we do the work, right? And what you guys are bringing to the forefront. I've been just taking a few notes as you've been talking and teaching all of us around opening the dialogue, inviting people in, right? So, going, and if you are in pain, or someone that's with you shoulder to shoulder that is in pain, just invite them to share that space with you, and to know that they are being listened to, and they can offer as much or as little as they feel comfortable doing. Don't let yourself go into that default stance as we all can be accustomed to doing. And that's where the change is going to start happening and actually be meaningful. And I really loved what you said, Lynn, about connecting kids with kids. So important, and for us to be able to do that in a good way and in a fulsome way, we need to really get in tune with ourselves and the things that you have all talked about this evening, around our own biases, the language that we use. Are we listening to simply just respond, to judge, or are we listening to understand and find acceptance? And I'm cognizant of the time. We're going to go over just a little bit, which is totally okay, because I would really like your insights on, in your experience so far, in ways that might not be as obvious to people, generally speaking. When we talk about systemic racism and oppression, I think generally speaking, people can go to policing and profiling, or the child welfare system, and just generalize those kinds of things. And what we really miss is the individual human impact, I think. And where my mind is going is around not only the loss of culture and ceremony, but the impact of those things in terms of health and mental health and things like that. Are you able to speak to some of that from your experiences?
I can go.
Okay, please do, Kristi.
So with the loss of language and culture and things like that, with it being Indigenous People Days coming up, and then this being about systemic racism, and both wanting to celebrate different things and really looking and acknowledging things, when we're looking at that, one thing I find mental health, the mental health system for especially Indigenous males is just, it's so lacking. And I don't mean in the way of supports for addictions and stuff. I mean the other way, in the way of positive supports. Remembering that men don't have a lot of other men that they can rely on. Some of these men, especially Indigenous men, have such amazing talents that get so buried under trauma and the system. And the system continually, every Indigenous person almost seems to have to fight twice as hard for less of what somebody else would gain. And it just, I find, especially with Indigenous men, it weighs on their soul. One of the things that has to change as a system is really, really acknowledging the intergenerational trauma, especially to men, and how we can celebrate the more positives without pointing out all the negatives.
Yeah. I may I just go from what
Yes,
Kristi
please do build on that, Arthur.
So the idea of moving from the negatives to the positives is the painting. I hope whoever's listening in looks up Randall Charbonneau on the internet and comes across this amazing artist, what he's created. An amazing person who went through incredible traumas. And I won't go really far with it. We don't have the time right at this moment. But one of the things I just wanted to leave the discussion with this evening is the ability to pause. And when I say pause, it's an acronym. It's paying attention unveils sacred experiences. Paying attention unveils sacred experiences. And I think if there was a way for all of us to pause and pay attention in every day of our lives, what we are doing, how we are relating, connecting with another human being, maybe we'll start to see some things that say we don't have to go this way, an oppressive way. We can go a collaborative, connected way. And this is what we're going to do. And I think we'll get there if we have the strength, the guts to pause, just slow down. Don't try to be right about everything. And I'm talking about federal governments now. I'm talking about if they could find a way to pause and pay attention to the voices of people that have been pushed so far away and really listen and be guided by what those voices have to say. I think we could really go in a great way. And to me, what you have done this evening, all of you, everybody in this circle this evening, is a form of pausing. We're paying attention to each other, and that's a sacred experience. And I just want to say thank you for pausing this evening and allowing me to be part of this. I'm very, very profoundly grateful.
Arthur, that
Yes.
painting, I just want to say that painting has spoke volumes to me since you came on the camera. If we can take a look at it. The great thing about it that I see is it really has to do with the whole conversation. If you see, it's very ceremonial, but Yoda also notice it's uplifting. Everybody's lifting everybody up.
Yeah.
And that way, no one's left behind.
No.
Nobody's story isn't told.
Yeah. Absolutely, Kristi. Absolutely.
Beautiful, Kristi. Yeah.
Beautiful.
It's what we must, it's not a must. It's like at the time in this space and time, it's such an open time right now. And as much suppression, we worked with a lot of people in the People's Park. I started working with Oakland and some of the Indigenous Mexican Latino families when I first came through Berkeley. And there was such a need for understanding how to lift the marginal And as soon as you say marginal, it's another language. And I'm calling out to the other again. And so making programs from the bottom up instead of the top down has been what my projects have been about. And I think it's how we can hold hands. And it's so funny because my daughter was very young when we first moved to Berkeley, and we hadn't been around a lot of the homeless. And it's like going on reservation and not being around a lot of, reservational people until I spent a lot of time with, the Iroquois Nation up north. And there's so many of us that have had circles. And when you look at being in the depth, you ask for the witness of their greatness. And I don't care who it is. If we can see the witness of another human being's greatness, I think those are the gifts. And I thank you as well for letting me speak tonight. I know time is of essence, and I appreciate the conversation. I steep into the gifts of watching my young daughter at, I think she was 7. She was so afraid of the marginalized, if I'm going to say that word again. And by the end of it, she was out there with bread, passing it to anyone and not being afraid, because I gave her the opportunity to be part of, not separate of. And I think that's what each of us need to do. Look at the witness of the greatness within the other.
I have a big motto I like to share with everybody, and that usually is when you're looking at things and when you're helping people out, always please look at it from a standpoint of you are giving a hand up, not a handout.
Good, well said.
Love it. Very beautiful. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for that.
Super.
What beautiful, gorgeous, and powerful closing remarks from all of you. We didn't set out for them to be closing remarks in a sense, but I just feel you've brought everything full circle. And we've talked about the reality of the negative because it's there and it's thriving. But discussions like this and honesty and, as Lynn says, offering the opportunity to be part of rather than separate from, I think that's what we have achieved this evening for sure, and what we hope to continue to promote at all levels, and choosing to be present and as you mentioned in the very beginning, Arthur, about honoring people, honoring one another and honoring ourselves. And I'm just very grateful to have been able to be part of the discussion with all of you. I'm sorry that we've had some technical difficulties. I don't know if Gerard is available to be able to offer anything by way of some closing thoughts.
I'd also like to say one more thing before we go.
Absolutely, please do.
Before the end of the night, what I would like to do is in celebration, Arthur, give us a rundown quickly of that wonderful man. And if he had something he could tell us all today, what do you think he'd want us to hear?
I think what Randy would want to hear is your voice. I think that's what he would be doing. That's what he did when he was alive, was to create a process so that people's voices could come out and be heard and be listened to, and relationships would be created. That's what he was doing. And he was doing it in the most remarkable settings. We could spend a whole discussion talking about what he was up to and what he was doing. He was a very, very dear, dear close friend. And I'm sorry he's gone. I think about him all the time. But that's what he would be asking, is how do we create a place for people's voices to be heard and that we act on their voice? So that transformation not change takes place, transformation takes place. huge difference between the two. We used to talk about it endlessly. So I'm really glad that you commented about his painting, Kristi. I think I'm glad that you did that. I feel like he, honestly, he's sitting. I've got his arm around my shoulder.
Yeah.
That's how I feel right now. And,
well, and if I might take a liberty, Arthur and Kristi, I guess what's just coming to me as you're speaking is the power of connection.
Yeah.
And everyone needs that. Everyone needs that to have a fulsome life and feel that they belong and feel that they have a purpose. And wow, yeah, this has just been incredible. And I'm looking forward to learning more about your friend.
All right.
And yeah, I'm sorry that he's no longer here with us, but he certainly seems to be. So, yeah. And I'd like to, before I get into kind of the business piece of things in terms of wrapping things up, I do want to ask all of you if you have any questions of one another or anything. Kristi's done very well to put Arthur in the hot seat, so to speak, and what it's done is led to more learning and more of a rich discussion for us. So if either of you have any questions that you want to put forth to each other, please do so.
I feel really complete with my brother and sister here, and I really appreciate both of your honoring. And I want to honor Kristi's mom mostly, and really develop that feminine relatedness that I feel. So that really connected me.
Beautiful.
And, thank you so much. Blessings. I do have to run. I'm so sorry.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. And it's been a pleasure, Lynn. And I hope that all of our paths will cross again.
Yeah. Wonderful.
Yeah. Be well. Thank you.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.
So, Arthur, do you have any questions for Kristi? She's asked you a ton tonight.
Yeah, no,
Now's your chance.
Yeah, no, I'm hoping that Kristi, like I just, there's an old, what's that movie, Casablanca? And, right? And this feels like the beginning of a good friendship.
I love it.
Oh, it's one of my favorite movies. So I'm hoping that we get to collaborate on other initiatives with your whole Kristi and the organization 350 or 360 here. That would be great. We're looking to do some work right now on a sort of an international level about poetry and transforming abuse and getting people from around the world to join in on that. And if the group of you here would like to be part of that, that would be fantastic. And I can send you information about what we're doing and what we're building. So I hope that we collaborate further down the road on a number of initiatives. And I'd asked Kristi at the beginning about that, like, if she has the time and space for that. But there's something kind of exciting that we're working on, collaborating with some poet laureates here in Canada and so on. And so it would be wonderful to have you guys part of this.
Amazing. Absolutely. And I, at least speaking for myself, I don't want to bomb anything.
Yeah, well, I guess you guys would. Because Kristi's an author, right? So
that's right.
I just thought, oh my goodness, I can't. This is wonderful.
Okay, but again, hang on though, guys. I'm a children's author.
Yeah.
Well,
awesome.
I think there's more discussion to be had, that's for sure. But I guess in summary of tonight's discussion, again, an example of when people connect and start talking and start listening and even, kind of starting to really develop our skill of finding some comfort in uncomfortable conversations, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think all of you really helped us be able to do that. And the sky's the limit, really, in how much further we can go and the things we can continue to build upon. And the new education that we can bring forth for everyone, but more specifically, the children that are coming up into their independence, and they will have the truth that we did not have. And I think that, you know, with everything coming up this weekend and with Indigenous Peoples Day, you know, you want to celebrate, but at the same time, you don't want to dishonor or devalue a lot of the horrific things that are coming out in this movement toward truth. So I thank all of you for helping us move that discussion further. And also, you know what, encouraging us, no matter what, where we come from, who we are, working through our traumas, working through our biases, turning our burdens into blessings, if not only for ourselves, but for others. And I think tonight really showcased an opportunity to do that. So thank you very, very much. And and so I guess what I'll do now is just kind of get into the wrap up for tonight, because we have gone a little bit over our hour, but you know what, it's been wonderful. So time is no matter right now. Just wanting to let everybody know that we will be, and when I say we, Voice of Men 360 organization will be announcing a few individuals' names over the next few days that have lost their lives due to the system failure. And we also want to share that Voice of Men 360, you know, we're working very hard on sending an open letter to our Prime Minister and a statement to the media. And once it is finalized, we will publish it and it will be sent off to the Prime Minister himself.
Good.
Few announcements to share. We have 2 very special shows coming up tomorrow, Sunday, June 20th. We will have our Father's Day celebration. The panel discussion was entitled, Let's Celebrate While They Are Alive. People from different walks of life will join and share their memories and discuss how we can help fathers out all across the globe, really. And then the week later, hard to believe that it's becoming the end of June, but June 27th, Sunday at 7 p.m., there'll be another panel discussion, and that one will be around Are South Asian Men Ready to Open Up? Let's help them. So please join us for those events if you can. One of the wonderful things about the events is that they are recorded and they are available later if you aren't able to join us for the airtime. So we've got 2 live shows weekly through Facebook and YouTube. Open Up, which is what we did this evening, sharing personal life journeys. A live talk show is on every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Vili, the Tamil live talk show, is on Sundays at 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. There's also a monthly webinar the first Saturday of every month from 10:30 in the morning until 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. There's a monthly special show called The Unspoken Tears, and that airs the second Saturday of every month from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And typically the focus of those discussions are centered around domestic violence against men, bullying, male sexual abuse, and human trafficking, and other important issues that men and boys are facing in this world today. We also have our panel discussion twice a month in English and in Tamil. We bring people from different parts of the world and they share their perspectives and thoughts and life experiences on a particular topic that will be published prior to the discussion. And lastly, but also as important, there's a monthly men's group meeting only for men. It's on the 3rd Sunday every month from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. And the next one is actually tomorrow. So please do join us. And the other very important thing that the Voice of Men 360 has dedicated themselves to do is an event called Pass the Talking Stick. And it's Indigenous peer-to-peer support group. However, everyone is welcome to join. It's the 4th Friday of every month from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. through Zoom. And the next one will be next Friday, June 25th. And a little shout out to our guest this evening, Kristi White, as she is the moderator for that event and does a beautiful job with it. So please remind everybody, there are no limitations with gender, age, nationality, or ethnic groups. If you want to join us here at Voice of Men 360, we welcome all walks of life and anyone can participate in our shows. If you happen to want to be a guest on any of our shows or are willing to be part of our organization and help us directly or indirectly, please reach out to us. We would love to work with anybody who comes forward by way of themselves in a professional venue, experts, community organizations, associations, corporations, government officials and businesses, you name it. We're happy to hear from you. And you may do so by calling 1-437 889-8329. The email address is info, I-N-F-O, at voiceofmen360.org. And the website, you can find us at www.voiceofmen360.org. You can also find us on many social media outlets, our Facebook group and page. Please join our group so you can see our daily activities, and please invite your friends as well. We're all kind of getting a little bit out of our comfort zone and being encouraged to do quick pop-ins and quick lives from wherever we might be in the world, just to check in with everybody and let anybody know at any given time that there's somebody there to support you. Also on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. So please subscribe to your YouTube channel, Voice of Men 360. And we want to reach out to as many people and help as many people as we possibly can. So we want to thank you all very much for joining us this evening, especially to our guests this evening as well for such a great and rich and important discussion. And I'm going to say goodnight and thank you. Time to sign off, Sivam.